r/AskReddit. Students of Reddit, what is something your teacher has done that made you think, wow, how hasn't this person been fired yet? Last semester this happened to me, and I'm still unexplainably pissed off about it. I'm a very shy person in class. I barely talk unless I'm called on, and I absolutely hate talking in front of people. I usually wait until after class to ask the teacher a question or just talk to them about something they said. This teacher was just a douchebag right off the bat. I asked him a question about the syllabus I thought could wait after class just because I was curious about it, and he told me to ask the next day in class and I'll get an answer. I thought alright, whatever, maybe he thought it was a good question or something. I ask it in class. Remember, I hate talking in class or in front of people. He tells me I should have been paying attention from last class. I was embarrassed and a little bitter. Then there's a 4-person group project we have to do that required a survey and analyzing the data, then presenting it to the class. I tell my group I will do all of the hard work and make the presentation. If they do all the talking, they accept. I get it done like it wasn't even a problem. We present it. We get half off because I didn't talk. Never was it in the rubric that everyone in the group needs to talk, let alone mentioned that everyone needs to talk. Groups before us didn't have everyone speak. My group asks why we all got half off when I don't want to toot my own horn. I did a great survey, analysis, and presentation. He says he didn't hear from the entire group. I'm fucking livid at this point. I talked to another professor about it, and he's been my professor for 3 semesters at this point, so he knows what kind of student I am. He agrees with me that it's fucked, but he said he'd help me with my speaking in public for the final assignment in the other class. Final assignment comes. I do a great presentation, report, and some bomb-ass speaking. I didn't stutter once or forget what I had to say and had the entire class's attention. They asked me a whole bunch of questions, and I felt great about it. I get my paper back for it, and he accuses me of plagiarism. I bring this shit up to him, and he tells me, because I didn't quote anything. I had full quote and citations for every quote. It was a fucking college paper. Of course it was done correctly. I go to my dean. They ask the teacher, and he changed my grade for the entire class. Motherfucker wanted to fail me when I rightfully deserved to pass. I passed all of my tests and quizzes with A's and B's, so there was no reason I wouldn't pass. He also apologized to me on the last day of class, and I told him to fuck off. Only time in my 21 years of life I've spoken rudely to a teacher. He's apparently done this to other students, but they just accepted the grade in his class, which was still passing, but not a good grade. I refuse to take any classes with him as a professor. For reference, in my school you take 1 year of foreign language in middle school and 3 in high school. Meet my Latin teacher, Mr. L. Took Latin because I hated the other choices. First year went okay. Multiple days Mr. L would just hand us a worksheet from the interwebs and toss it to us, not even checking if it was good or not. Many times it was not good and the words were not in our book, Cambridge Latin 1, so we would do none of the sheet. Next day he wouldn't even check the thing. Near the end of the year he was asked a question and he just moaned and smacked his head onto the whiteboard 3 to 4 times until sighting on some kid's desk and staying silent for the rest of class. Year 2 we did some more Latin, but more and more of the class was just videos and PowerPoints on useless stuff like a whole week on Roman army marching lines. It was this year when Mr. L informed us that the New York curriculum for languages no longer had anything for Latin, so Mr. L was doing it all himself. He would often have whole classes where he would talk about how his day was, then just give us a really easy sheet or a really hard one to fill the remaining 20 minutes with. At this point I had a laptop for schoolwork and often had 4-player Steam games in the back. He gave no shits, ladies and gents. Also near the end the head smacking began to increase. Year 3 is where it gets fun. We no longer ask the Cambridge books and just are given sheets. Head smacking is at an all-time high, and more of the class is just videos. I swear we watched more movies than any other class. The tests were non-existent and grades just kinda showed up, leaving most of us with solid 90s. Even more days are straight stories about the current school play. He was a pianist for them, and his other lifestyle choices like fishing or eating. Year 4, the final year, is where he just gives up. No more tests or quizzes. He says out loud the final will be nonsense because no one checks it, and at the end of every week, to report to him for you to tell him what your grade shall be. As you may guess, most asked for 99 or 100. I always went with 96 or so, to keep my parents from asking questions. Every class was just videos or movies or him talking. The final was the best test I had ever taken, as every other test in the whole was advanced shit like speaking a full paragraph of Spanish and interpreting a response. Ours was where was Latin spoken, where is Rome located, what does est mean. I got a good grade. Oh, and he still smashed his head into the whiteboard. I fear for his health. Edit. Can't spell for shit. 2 years back, when I started at university, I failed one of the first exams that I took. Interested in what I did wrong, I tried to schedule a meeting with the professor to look into my exam. This was already really difficult, as the professor planned the exam review during one of our mandatory classes at a university building that was a 20-minute bike ride from where classes, as the one I was supposed to have, usually take place. I pulled some strings with the supervisor of the mandatory course, and therefore I was able to actually visit the exam review. During the review, as you'd imagine, there was no one there apart from a few second and third year students that didn't have the mandatory course. I got to see the exam, and to my own surprise the professor didn't award any points for a question I should been awarded points for. Naturally, I asked the man, and he said he would take a look at it at home. Because my current mark was on the verge of actually passing the course, I asked him if he had the calculations for the mark with him. He said he didn't, but again said he'd take a look at it that evening. Unfortunately, I had to leave for the mandatory course, as I promised that professor I'd join right after the exam review. That evening is when the real shit show started to happen. I got an email from the professor saying that he looked at my exam once again, but the missed points didn't matter for me passing the course. He did offer me an option to write an essay about the subject, and if sufficient, would allow me to pass the course. I kindly accepted the offer, but also asked him for the calculation of the initial mark, as I was still interested to see it. I then received an email telling me that he had no intention of sharing it with me, as he didn't want his authority questioned. From this point onwards, you have to understand that both my parents are journalists, and I used to do some freelance journalism work too. I felt like he was hiding something, either that he didn't want me to pass the course without writing the essay, or that he just couldn't be bothered to recalculate my mark. I demanded the professor that he gave me insight in the grading system, as I believed that the university was obligated to be open about their grading systems. He again declined, and so I decided to go to student council. In the meantime, I wrote the essay nonetheless, as I did care about passing the course as quickly as again. A few days passed before I was able to schedule with a student counselor. She told me that my initial thought was right, and that the professor had to give me insight in the grading system. I also informed the exam committee, and they too said he had to be open about the grading system. A few hours later, I received an email from the professor with a calculation for the grade. It was the weirdest thing ever. Interestingly enough, there was a sort of point reduction of -0.4 in, you guessed it right, the exact part that I wasn't given points to in the first place, leading to me not passing the exam. This calculation of -0.4 however also meant that the course couldn't be passed with full credit. I then went to student council again, and they said they would handle it. They haven't. I asked them a few times, but they said that they didn't have time for it right now, but that they wanted to look at it as soon as they had time. Nothing happened since. A lot of you are probably wondering why I didn't follow up on this weird incident. First of all, I didn't want all of this to have any implications on my classmates, who might be forced to retake the test. Secondly, the professor allowed me to pass the course after I sent him my essay, which I doubt he ever read at all. Lastly, this particular professor is an important person in the particular subject that I'm studying at my university. He knows that I know what he did, and if he or his colleagues ever decide to screw with me again, it will bite him twice as hard. Okay, I'll do the short versions, and if anyone wants to hear the longer versions just comment below, okay? In first grade we had a year-long sub that sent me to the office 4 times. once for refusing to read a quote I pulled out of a book in front of the class. I had yet to be diagnosed anxiety, twice for not finishing my morning work, despite the fact that there were other kids they didn't finish their morning work and weren't sent to the principal, and once for who the fuck knows why. In 6th grade through 8th grade I had a Spanish teacher that didn't actually speak a word of Spanish. She was a substitute. She was a substitute for 3 years straight, and the teacher never came back during that point at all. The kids were terrible to her. At one point I had to tackle a guy over a desk. Surprisingly enough, I didn't actually get in trouble. In 8th grade my science teacher was really nice, but she had no authority despite the fact that she had been teaching for about 40 years at that point. She was really easy to get off on a tangent. Just ask her about cats, and the class ahead of me figured this out and bullied her horribly. One time we came into her class and she was just sitting behind her desk sobbing. When we asked her what's wrong, and she said in a very shaky voice they threw the chair out the window. Sure enough, when we looked out the window, there was a chair half embedded in the ground, presumably from the 5-story drop point. I have yet to know how they figure out how to get a chair through a window that would be even fit a person, although I'm reasonably certain if it had been able to fit a person, the teacher would have gone out the window instead of the chair. In high school freshman year I had a teacher that allowed another student to threaten me with half a pair of scissors. When I say allowed, I mean she gently attempted to talk him down from the other side of the room, while he completely ignored her and continued to swing his homemade shiv at me. In 11th grade I had a teacher who said at one point, and I quote, "Men only want women to be pretty, they don't want them to be funny or smart. So just shut up, okay?" Somehow this was the man that was in charge of the campus beauty pageant, which was moved to a girls feel better about themselves. Honestly, this last teacher is the one that I'm still angry at to this day. All the other ones I've forgiven, but I'm still ready to fight that last guy. Also, as a bonus, I had a French teacher in high school who I'm pretty certain had some sort of horrible brain trauma at some point and couldn't remember any pop culture past the early 90s. And I'm not just talking she was out of the media loop, she genuinely didn't know who the current president of the US was. I had an Anna as a teacher in preschool who used to hit us with a pointer stick on the knuckles by the chalkboard. It was worse for me because I'm allergic to chalk. In elementary school a teacher put a kid head first into the garbage can. With the help of some students he allowed to join in, he put another kid into the large disposal outside. He lifted a kid by the neck and slammed him into the wall to yell at him, with the permission of the kid's father, which was weirder. Then he threw a couple desks across the room, wrecked a drum kit during the desk throwing incident. He was allowed to keep hazardous materials in his office. He laughed with students who would insult others if the joke was that good, despite it possibly being at the expense of a child's emotional state. He eventually recognized he had a problem and excused himself from teaching at our school, went to another school to teach younger children instead. Apparently no horrible incidents after that. I had a high school teacher that was that kind of old sweet innocent racist, like he didn't know he was being racist, but it was meant as a compliment. IDK, if some people know what I mean about that. Honestly, he looked a lot like Mr. Magoo. Kinda just as clueless and in his 70s. Another high school teacher spoke in such a monotone voice that no one could keep their eyes open in class. Every year 50% of the students would fail. Some of the faculty couldn't talk to him because of it either. I mean, he wasn't a bad person, just really not suited to, well, ever using vocal cords. We had an art teacher who was amazing and encouraging, happy and eccentric. She was like everyone's crazy cuddly grandma. But some days she would walk around without pants. Some pantsless days she would demonstrate cartwheels. She was 65 plus. One teacher was always dressed up like she, well, I can only describe it now as what nudists wear when they have to exit their resort/homes. Was not too bad because she was in her 40s and really fit, thin, looked like a fitness model, really. The only thing was that we were in a Catholic school and she would get in trouble for it, change her clothes. But the change of clothes weren't really all that different. It's like she really didn't know how to do appropriate attire. Also, a lot of it was fluorescent patterns on skin-tight lycra. There was a lot of affairs too. Also, one teacher got so drunk with me on a school trip She started spilling her guts about everything in her relationship, and then I would go buy a sandwich at a street vendor and she would steal the whole damn sandwich off me. Twice this happened. IDK, it was just weird. Apparently this is often on school trips with her. Oh, another teacher always took the credit for students' artwork by claiming they were all actually his ideas in his portfolio to be able to get praise in galleries and do seminars and crap. He did it to so many of us. Wow, I'm suddenly realizing how bizarre Catholic school was. I was leaving out all the lawsuits from teachers accused of sexual assault and luring minors. I figured that is unfortunately common in most places. IDK maybe not. I went to an elementary school full of shitty teachers. Ones that would yell at me and be visibly frustrated for not learning the same way as other kids. I had a teacher in first grade who yelled at me for twirling my hair while she was telling a story. The same teacher yelled at me for either yawning or sighing while she was giving the class instructions and said I was being rude. It wasn't even an exaggerated, it just came out of me naturally because it had been a long day for 6-year-old me. And she would pick on me for a lot of things, and she told my mom she thought I was like autistic or something. In second grade we were writing our own stories we could publish. I could staple some color construction paper on it as a book cover and put it in the front of the class so others could read it. Other kids wrote like 2 or 3 page stories about what they did over the weekend, but I had dedicated myself to one masterpiece that had a lot of detail and a lot of drawing, and my teacher was mad at me for not publishing multiple stories. She was also mad that I took my time doing drawings and other crafts because I didn't want to put out shit like the other kids. That was my mindset. I wanted it to be perfect. When I was learning multiplication in 3rd grade, my teacher would get super pissed at me cause I was having a hard time with my times tables and just get impatient with me in general, even though I tried my best. Turns out I was just a gifted and talented child who was mature compared to other kids and just needed to be instructed differently and given more challenges. I switched schools with teachers who taught specifically gifted and talented kids and I did very well. Had a 9th grade reading level in like 4th grade and was praised for my detailed work. Not all the teachers at the school were like that, and the rest of the teachers taught regular kids. I remember one kid who was in the gifted education program who was in 3rd grade or something like that, and he was reading giant chapter books like Harry Potter. We both went to the homework club after school and a teacher yelled at him for reading books that were above the typical reading level for his age, even though his reading level was about 7th or 8th grade. He tried to explain to her that he read at higher levels, but she insisted he was too young to read chapter books. How are you going to stop a kid from excelling? From using their intelligence? I just didn't, and still don't get it. Probably going to get lost among the many interesting tales here, but no less. Here we go. 6th grade science class at a Texas Harmony public school. Boy, what a year. First one was a firm, but hardly mean teacher to begin with, but that changed fast. Every week, it got marginally worse than the last. My classmates collectively dreaded going to her class every time we had her. She was so unengaging. All we did was take notes. No documentaries, no field tests, no labs, nothing. Dullest year of middle school. She shouted at all of us at the slightest misstep, though, to be fair, many of my classmates were prone to being rather disruptive and talkative. I suppose she thought group punishment was a good idea, but the thing is, for a quiet kid like me, this was not good. This was messing up my otherwise clean discipline record, and I was not having it, but there was nothing I could do. What was worse, she used me as a model student at times, saying I was the best in front of the entire class. My friends, at least for my part, I almost became a social pariah because I was so good, and it hurt. The only relief I was granted of her was when I got appendicitis and had to stay at Cook Children's Hospital for nearly 6 weeks, and her one redeeming factor had my whole class sign a get well soon card, which I still have to this day. But soon as I was back, it was like nothing changed. More shouting, more group punishment, more dull node sessions and quizzes. Dull. Marizo due to the fact she dangled carrots in front of us. Promises of field trips to the Houston NASA Space Center and other Texas science facilities on the conditions we behave well throughout the year, which even I at the time have to admit was pretty unrealistic. Her baiting did not improve her esteem among the students at all. She finally left after she completely snapped at 2 elementary girls who were allegedly being disruptive, and she pulled their hair by their ponytails. They were younger sisters of some of my classmates, which lowered her esteem among us infinitesimally lower, if that was even possible, and particularly me, since those girls were my younger sister's friends. When the official notice of dismissal was passed out to my class to take home, we almost cheered. I later learned that she may or may not have been a Seventh-day Adventist, which, with hindsight, explains the heck out of why we learned next to nothing about evolution that year. Her replacement was only slightly better. He was alright, giving us more opportunities for hands-on experiments in the lab, but the dude was also uptight as a knot. He was soon regarded just as lowly as the previous teacher after he didn't send a classmate with ADHD to the nurse's office. After he fell out of his stool, our homeroom was the same science lab and in fact gave him DPS, discipline point system, for disrupting the class after giving him fair warning. He was gone within a month or so. Soon exams were coming up, and we had our third and final, the name of which I'm only giving because the experiences, or lack thereof, we had with her won't seem nearly as humorous. Ms. Dumbold, say it aloud, was our science teacher for all of about 4 to 6 weeks or so, and she taught us next to nothing we didn't know already. At that point our class was about beyond redemption in the eyes of the faculty of the school as a whole, much to my mortification, and I think we almost had to be passed up on our science exams for that year due to our overall behavior that year. I had a math teacher in high school who we had a ton of issues with. I'm a student that will stand up for myself when a teacher is calling BS, and if they want to make things difficult I will do the same, but I keep it in the rules to avoid being punished just annoying. To paint a picture of things, this is what we had to deal. Miss Smith, name changed, had a doctorate, and required that she be called Dr. Smith. Reasonable, however, anyone that called her Ms. was written up for insubordination even on the first day of class. Naturally I refused to answer any questions in class or acknowledge that I was being spoken to unless she addressed me as Master Unlimited Ned, which technically is my title. There were a bunch of other things she would do, like grade homework on a 3-strike basis. 50 problems were assigned. If you messed more than 3 times on the collective 50 problems you received a 0, and that could be 3 mistakes on a single problem. The final straw of disbelief that she was still a teacher came at the end of the year. About 75% of her 5th period class was app testing during that day. Due to completely normal reasons, testing ran a bit long, so instead of sending us to the last 10 minutes of 5th period we were sent directly to lunch as a group. Then, when we finished lunch, were dismissed to our 6th period class, which was now in session. No big deal, right? One of the students that wasn't app testing and had to attend Ms. Smith's class that day stopped me in the hallway after 6th to inform me that all 19 of the students who were app testing were written up for skipping class. Immediately I headed to her room to explain the issue. At this point I wasn't even surprised by her reaction at this point. Just to clarify, I asked her why we received retoops, and she smugly said, because no one showed up at the time that I was scheduled to have you in class. So I explained the late testing and being sent straight to lunch. It was brushed aside with a "I don't care, that's not the schedule I received." I gave up AMD, headed straight to the test proctor's office and explained everything to him. He went to her classroom to explain the situation, and he explained the situation same as myself. He was given the same response with an added, "This is very unprofessional behavior. I should have been notified of the change in schedule immediately. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but during testing not even staff are allowed electronics in the room. It is sealed. Nobody enters or exits during testing. So there was no way to notify anybody. At this point it is escalated to the principal, who throws all the retoops out and just tells them both to drop it. She still teaches there today, causing just as much issues for students." 3rd grade, the teacher consistently singled out the 4 students who were in the gifted program. Allegedly, her daughter didn't test in, and she was bitter about it. She put us at a separate table and isolated us from other students. We got in trouble way more than other students, even though we were all pretty well behaved for the most part. I was once playing with a paper football. I obviously should not have been doing that in class, and she locked me in the prep room hallway, basically a well-lit closet. Later, she told the principal that I threw a football across the classroom while her back was turned. 6th grade language arts. I think this teacher actually liked me, but she had a very strange way of showing it. I was, a very anxious student, and I asked a lot of questions, especially when we had to swap and grade other students' classwork. I was very concerned about grading incorrectly. Once, I raised my hand, and her back was turned, and someone told her that a student had a question. Before turning around, she said, "I know it must be one of 3 people," in an irritated tone. Really not what middle schoolers need to hear. She also told another girl who was switching schools not to get into drugs, presumably just because this girl wore black and listened to emo music. She told another student that she needed to get her priorities straight because she talked too much in class. 10th grade chemistry. Half of the class failed tests because he wasn't a good teacher. He proceeded to openly mock individual students and the class as a whole. Freshman year of college. Not as bad but still irritating. Teacher offered extra credit for finding grammatical mistakes in his syllabus. I found several, and he asked me for sources to prove that these were errors. I linked him to the Purdue OWL site, a nationally recognized writing resource, and he said that's just what they do at Purdue. I did not receive extra credit. Surprise twist. I'm now getting my PhD with the hopes of becoming a college writing teacher. Luckily, none of my teachers completely scarred me for life. TL. Doctor, teachers weirdly singled out students for factors beyond their control. Now becoming a teacher despite these negative role models. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.